The building hums like a beehive behind thick walls, but his room is quiet on purpose. Overhead lights wash the table in an even glow. Pages rest in tidy stacks. Tabs march down the edges of binders with the same discipline as a color guard. Senator John Neely Kennedy sits at the long side sleeves, crisp notes, square, posture, steady. No drama, here only process. Outside cameras nap on tripods, and footsteps echo like distant surf. Inside, every sound is small and deliberate. Paper turns. Pens click once, then stop. A staff counsel leans over a statute, draws a soft line under a clause, and nudges it forward. Everything in this room is a vote for clarity. He works in layers. Text first, always. If the words of a statute carry the load, the argument does not need theater. He reads out the section headings with his eyes, traces definitions back to where they were first set, follows cross-references like rails on a track. Structure next. Where the text sits in the larger code matters because placement telegraphs purpose. History, third. Not a blizzard of speeches and headlines, but the narrow lane of what courts have said when forced to decide. Policy question last. Not because it does not matter, but because it only matters inside the boundaries built by text and structure. That order keeps the floor from tilting. It also keeps debates from turning into talk shows. His team mirrors that order. One aide keeps a stack of statutory excerpts, each only a few pages, margins wide lines numbered. Another maintains a simple chart that maps elements to evidence and burdens to actors. A third builds short memos on the cleanest statements of controlling doctrine, no flood of citations, only the handful that anchor the rest. A committee parliamentarian on loan sits near the end of the table with a thin book of rules and a pencil sharp as a violin string. The goal is not to overwhelm an opponent. The goal is to reduce the argument to what can be verified in real time. On the whiteboard, 4 lanes. Authority. Procedure. Scope. Remedies. Authority asks whether an agency or department actually has power to do what it wishes to do. Procedure asks whether it did the thing in a way the law requires. Scope asks how far the rule or decision can reach before it leaves the leash of its parent statute. Remedies ask what the law allows when someone gets it wrong. It looks simple because it has to be. Senators can get lost in their own thunder. A clean map prevents detours. Across the hall, another team is working. Elizabeth Warren arrives with a thick folder of policy briefs and data graphs, a map of outcomes and risks polished by staff who know their fields. The contrast is not a conflict. It is a portrait of 2 traditions in one institution. She will speak from the hill of impacts on households and markets. He will walk the fence line of legal authority, eyes on the posts and rails. Both kinds of preparation can matter, but only one can occupy the center of a hearing that promises to test the reach of law. Knowing this, he adds a thin card to the front of his binder that reads in block letters he will not need to glance at twice. Stay on the text. Treat people with respect. Ask questions that can be answered without adjectives. They rehearse, but not like theater. A counsel plays the role of witness, another plays the role of a supportive senator, a third plays the role of a skeptic. He does not script zingers or chase sound bites. He tightens questions. He removes extra words the way a carpenter sands the edge of a board. He cuts a compound sentence into 2 units so the mind can turn the corner without skidding. He moves from open-door questions to gates that click shut. Does the statute authorize? Where is the source of that authority? What standard governs? Who has the burden? What remedy follows? Nothing flamboyant. Everything accountable. A staffer slides a single sheet across the table. Known claims likely to surface. Each claim sits on its own line, with 2 columns to the right. Source requested. Source received. It is the grown-up version of a classroom checklist. If a witness offers a sweeping statement about constitutional limits, or a colleague floats a theory that sounds good on television but thin on paper, he will ask for the location of the authority that carries it. If the answer is a shrug toward principle with no text to carry it, he will not pounce. He will anchor. Please direct the committee to the controlling language. He will say it without flourishes, because the language should do the heavy lifting. He insists on a second sheet that most offices have forgotten. Definitions page. Ordinary terms look harmless until the law gives them clothing. Person. Agency action. Final. Substantial. Due process. Words that seem friendly on the street can become very specific in a hearing room. His aide lists the definitions drawn from the right titles and chapters, notes the exceptions marks when a term of art imports test steps from another place in the code. It reads like a glossary with a backbone. He knows this is where many large mistakes begin. Precision is not snobbery. Precision is fairness. He tests his own assumptions the way a mechanic listens for taps under the hood. If a claim of overreach rests on a rule that never passed through the notice and comment gate, that is simple. If a claim rests on emergency authority, the air gets thinner and the ground gets slick. He draws 3 boxes. Threshold, process, tail. Threshold asks if the law even turned the key. Process asks whether the car stayed on the road. Tail asks whether the justification stretches beyond what the statute actually wrote into the seatbelts. He knows that people like policy shortcuts when a problem feels urgent. He also knows shortcuts make bad law that frays in court. He does not moralize about this. He builds questions that reveal it. He considers tone with the same care he gives to content. Viewers at home may never read an agency manual, but they recognize discipline when they see it. He will keep his voice level. He will allow a witness to finish a sentence. He will declare in his own way and without performing it, that disagreement does not require disrespect. He wants the audience to see that civil debate is not weakness. It is an operating system for a free country. He carries that into the smallest choices. He thanks a staffer by name when a document arrives. He adjusts his mic before the hearing, so no one has to interrupt a line of questioning later. He puts a legal pad at the far right corner for notes caused by answers he did not anticipate, because control without flexibility is just another kind of show. An aide brings in a folder of past committee exchanges to study patterns. He skims for habits in the other side. Does a colleague pivot from text to intent quickly? Does a witness over-rely on broad policy aims when text runs short? He pencils a margin note. When the answer moves away from the words, guide it back gently. Provide the words first yourself, if necessary. Let the record show the language before opinion lands on it. That small sentence is the spine of his entire approach. He ends rehearsal with a constraint that would make a speechwriter groan. No analogies unless they clarify, rather than decorate. The law is not a campfire. The law is a set of instructions written for strangers who will never share a room. It does not need smoke trails to be strong. A clean analogy can help a non-lawyer see the point. A playful one can buy 5 seconds of attention instead of losing 10. But analogies that replace text are a trick, and tricks poison trust. He will keep one or two ready like salt in a kitchen drawer and use them sparingly. Across the hall, Warren's aides pin fresh charts to foam boards, interest rate curves, complaint volumes by region, a map of enforcement actions and outcomes for households. The visual language says impact risk protection. He respects that. People live in results, not in code sections. He also knows that the chamber they are about to enter belongs to the branch that writes the rules that make results lawful. The difference matters. He jots a final reminder on the cover of his binder. Results are improved when rules are obeyed. If a policy is good but the authority is missing, the remedy is to write the authority, not to pretend it exists. The counsel playing the skeptic tries a fastball. What if an agency reads a flexible clause to cover a modern problem the drafters could not have foreseen? He nods. The law has tools for that, but the tools are not blank checks. Is there a hook in the text? Is the reading consistent across the statute? Does the process show modesty, not empire building? He sketches a ladder of follow-up questions. Each rung is small. Together, they climb high enough to see the roof. He closes his eyes for a moment and runs a mental drill. One claim at a time. One question per claim. One source per question. No clutter, no heat. If the answer is strong, acknowledge it and move on. If the answer is weak, return to the words. If the answer is evasive, narrow the scope and try again. If the exchange reaches an impasse note, the gap for the record and pivot to a new lane. He is not chasing a viral moment. He is engineering a public record that will make sense when the cameras move on. Someone sets a thin black folder by his elbow. Committee rules and procedural traps tabbed and distilled. He flips to a page on recognition and timekeeping, then to the section on entering exhibits. He will not lose a clean point to a messy process. He also studies one page most people never read. Decorum. He has been in rooms where voices jump the rail. He has watched public faith sag a little every time. He refuses to contribute to that loss. Respect is not a courtesy to an opponent. It is a debt to the people who own the institution. The last review is the smallest and most important. He turns through the thin stack of index cards that carry only 6 words each. Ask, source, standard, burden, remedy, record. Those 6 words are the bones of his method. Ask keeps him from lecturing. Source drags claims into daylight. Standard keeps tests from floating. Burden puts weight where it belongs. Remedy keeps outrage from outrunning authority. Record reminds him that hearings outlive headlines. He can hear the rhythm of those cards like the tick of a watch. A staffer peeks in and gives a small nod. He closes the binder and feels the mild give of the cover, the small sound of paper settling. He stands not for drama, but to shift his back and clear his breath. He will carry into the hearing the old-fashioned faith that institutions improve when people inside them choose craft over spectacle. That faith is not naive. It is stubborn. It is also contagious. He steps toward the door, and the room does what practiced rooms do. Chairs slide back quietly. Pens are capped. The whiteboard is wiped in a single pass. Aid 1 collects the statutes. Aid 2 checks the definitions page. Aid 3 ensures the exhibits are labeled and clipped. The parliamentarian tucks the rulebook under an arm with a face that reads, "Ready." Across the hall, Warren's team wheels their charts into position, calm and focused. 2 traditions again, walking toward the same table. The hallway is brighter than he expects. The air carries the metallic scent of equipment and the warm buzz of voices catching traction. He passes cameras that blink awake and staff badges that swing as their owners hurry. And he does not speed up. He lets his stride be ordinary. There is no advantage in sprinting into a marathon. At the threshold, he pauses just long enough to register the geometry of the room. Horseshoe, nameplates set like mile markers, witness table centered like a small island in a shallow bay. He feels that old, steady sense that a hearing is less a battle than a lab. If everyone does the work, the experiment yields clean data. If not, it yields smoke. He takes his seat, sets the binder square to the edge and places a pencil at 1 o'clock on the pad to the right. A staff counsel leans in as the microphones warm. The aide whispers a last detail about a footnote that might surface, and he nods once without fuss. He will not need the footnote unless someone tries to sell philosophy as law. If that happens, the footnote will be enough. A page brings water. He thanks the page by name. He draws a single line on the pad, the same line he draws before every major exchange. It is not superstition. It is a reminder that every question should have one clear purpose. He writes a small A next to the top of the line for authority and a small P halfway down for procedure, then an S for scope, and an R for remedies near the end. That is the path he will try to walk. If the hearing wanders, that thin pencil road can bring him back. The room shifts as members settle. Staff whisper the way people whisper in libraries. The chair checks a stack of opening notes. Across the curve, Warren reviews her charts, steady and composed. He looks down at the index card on top of the binder and reads the 6 words again. Ask, source, standard, burden, remedy, record. He slides the card under the cover. The red tally, lights on the cameras, turn steady. The hum of the building briefly fades under the brighter hum of attention. The gavel will fall soon. He is ready not to crush an opponent, but to carry a method into a space that needs it. He believes that citizens watching at home can sense the difference between noise and craft, between slogans and sentences that carry weight. He believes that hearings can still be schools where the subject is law, and the test is whether an argument can stand on its own feet. He believes that respect for people and respect for text are not rivals. They are partners. He inhales once, slow and even. Outside, the hive still buzzes. Inside the room is calm again. Paper waits. Microphones wait. The law waits, patient as stone, ready to answer anyone who is willing to read it. He rests his hand on the binder for the briefest second, then lifts it. The work begins. The room wakes in layers. Nameplates catch the light. Staffers retreat behind the rail. The witness adjusts a glass of water by a fraction, the way pilots tap gauges before takeoff. Cameras hold steady like quiet owls along the back wall. The gavel lands and the air tightens not with hostility, but with attention. What follows will not be a brawl. It will be a test of method. Elizabeth Warren takes the first lane. She frames the policy terrain with clean strokes that speak to outcomes families can feel at the kitchen table. She describes risks that creep in when rules lag behind markets, outlines benefits that follow when enforcement is steady and fair, and points to data that suggests where gaps may live. The charts at her elbow are tidy and readable. The cadence says, focus on people, focus on impacts, focus on the real world. When she yields, Kennedy leans forward just enough to show that the gears are already turning. He keeps his voice level and his language spare. He begins where he promised himself he would begin with text. He asks the witness to identify the precise source of authority for a contested action, not a theme, not a goal, but the language that lets public power move. He asks the committee counsel to keep the relevant chapter open on the table, not as theater, but as a shared anchor. Then he does what he practiced. He climbs the ladder one rung at a time. First rung, authority. He asks whether the statute speaks clearly to the tool being used. If the answer is yes, he asks where the phrase sits and what words surround it. If the answer is no, or if the answer shifts to general purpose and broad aims, he guides the exchange back to the page. Provide the words he says without saying the phrase out loud. Let us see them. Second rung, procedure. He asks whether the gatekeeping steps took place as the law requires. Notice given. Comments taken. Reasoned response recorded. If an emergency path was used, he asks how the emergency was defined and how narrow the lane remained. He does not accuse. He requests a map. If the map is clear, he nods and moves. If the map is smudged, he asks for landmarks that a court would recognize rather than slogans a press release would enjoy. Third rung, scope. He asks how far the rule reaches, not in aspiration, but in jurisdiction. He asks what the limit is and how it was drawn. He asks how the rule treats edge cases. He looks for the humble sentence that says where the line ends. If the answer swings wide toward outcomes, he marks the swing gently and returns to text. Outcomes matter he grants through tone, but scope keeps outcomes lawful. Fourth rung, remedies. He asks what happens when the rule is misapplied or when an actor falls outside the standard. He wants to hear the range of lawful responses, not the appetite for punishment. A remedy is a tool, not a vent. If the witness or a colleague leaps to penalties before standards, he resets the order with a small question that puts tests before consequences. The room senses the structure and settles into it. Warren listens without interruption, jotting a note here and there, then uses her next interval to tie policy aims back to the language he has spotlighted. She does not contest the need to cite. She argues that the words can be read with enough flexibility to meet modern realities. Kennedy acknowledges the point by turning to the counsel and the parliamentarian. He asks for the accepted methods of reading when text meets new problems. The counsel recites a short list in neutral terms, the way a math teacher points to known formulas. A rule of interpretation is not a wish. It is a fence that lets creativity work without trespass. The chair invites questions from other members. The rhythm wobbles as a few travel down side roads toward politics and headlines. Kennedy does not correct colleagues. He simply waits, then restores the map when his time returns. He does it with a question that begins at the same place every time. Where is the authority? He is not trying to trap anyone in a yes or no. He is showing viewers at home that the skeleton of public power is built from words they can read for themselves. A moment comes that tightens the room. A claim about expansive reach lands on the table with confidence backed by a summary line from a prior guidance document. Kennedy asks for the page. Staff search. The summary line turns out to be an inference rather than a directive. He does not pounce. He asks the witness to walk through the chain from statute to regulation to guidance and to identify the link that actually carries binding force. The walk reveals a gap between what is hoped for and what is written. Kennedy marks the gap without glee. The point is not humiliation. The point is house cleaning. Warren steps in with a measured counter. She notes that the gap could be closed through rulemaking, that the policy case is strong, and that leaving the gap unaddressed carries practical costs. Kennedy agrees that the case may be strong, and that costs are real. He adds the sentence he wrote on his binder before walking in. Results are improved when rules are obeyed. If the authority is missing, write it. Do not pretend it exists. The line is not a scold. It is a seam that holds the fabric together. As exchanges continue, the committee counsel earns a quiet spotlight. Kennedy asks the counsel to read into the record a definition that has been floating without a home. The definition is precise in a way that ordinary conversation rarely is. A simple word on the street becomes a specific term with edges. You can feel minds in the room adjust to that edge. That is the purpose of public hearings at their best. They make edges visible. A senator down the curve tries a different tack, pressing Kennedy on whether strict attention to text might trap policy in the past. He lets the question land. Then he answers in the same way he asks questions with order. Law has three virtues, he says through structure. Stability, so citizens can plan. Predictability, so actors can adjust. Accountability, so power can be traced to a grant and not to a personality. When text is respected, those virtues are strong. When text is treated as an inconvenience, those virtues are weak. A country can modernize its rules without unmooring them. The method is amendments and new statutes, not wishful readings. He leaves the thought on the table without raising his volume even a notch. Warren returns to one of her charts with a point that resonates. She shows how inconsistent enforcement harms small players more than large ones. She argues that the agency chose breadth to avoid loopholes. Kennedy nods at the concern and then asks the witness to explain how the rule channels discretion to avoid arbitrary results. This is the moment when philosophy must meet procedure. The witness describes internal guardrails. Kennedy asks where they live and whether the public has a path to challenge misuse. He is not content with intentions. He wants architecture. Another quiet pivot follows. He asks whether the record contains enough to justify the chosen standard, not just in volume, but in relevance. He is allergic to the idea that more pages equal more legitimacy. 1,000 comments can weigh less than one tight paragraph if only the paragraph speaks to the test the law actually requires. He picks a thread from the record and asks the witness to tie it to the standard knot, visible line unbroken. The knot holds. He marks it as strong and moves on. Viewers may not notice, but lawyers at home smile into coffee cups when a hearing treats records like records instead of applause meters. A junior member uses time to push a sweeping hypothetical. Kennedy lets the hypothetical breathe, then trims it to what the statute actually reaches. He reminds everyone that the hearing room is not a lab for thought experiments untethered to the law as written. He does it with one sentence and a small open hand that suggests steady, not stern. The chair nods. The witness thanks him for the clarification. The record becomes cleaner, with no one losing face. Midway, the counsel on loan from the parliamentarian desk raises a small flag about procedure. A submission is missing a proper citation. Kennedy asks that it be corrected before being entered. He is not picky for the sake of pride. He is careful for the sake of the archive. The paper trail we leave today becomes the path. Tomorrow, he says, by action rather than speech. The correction is made in 2 minutes. The hearing continues as if nothing happened. In reality, something important did happen. A tiny standard held. Warren finds a moment to underline common ground. She notes that every serious policy needs a legal home and that clear homes make enforcement cleaner and fairer. Kennedy agrees and pushes once more on the practical hinge that connects their lanes. If the legal home is too small for the policy, Congress can build a larger home. That is the honest path and the constitutional one. He says it without flourish. The oldest truths do not need shiny paper. The final third of the session brings a subtle shift. Staffers in various offices begin emailing one another about definitions and citations they want to tighten before future statements. That will show up later in the world outside this room as better memos and cleaner speeches. In the moment, you can feel the floor level as participants adopt the rhythm he set. Ask where the authority lives. Show the text. Name the standard. Identify the burden. Describe the remedy. Build the record. 6 simple verbs repeated until they become muscle memory. A few minutes before closing, a member tries to provoke heat, asking whether strict process delays relief for people who need it. Kennedy does not take the bait. He acknowledges the pressure that urgency creates, and then turns urgency into a reason for better law rather than sloppier law. When people are hurting, they deserve help that lasts. Help that lasts is built on rules that stand. Shortcuts feel kind, he notes in tone rather than phrase, until they collapse. Then they feel like betrayal. Warren closes her own lane with a constructive nudge. She suggests that if the committee sees gaps, it should consider a bipartisan working group to draft narrow authority where needed, instead of letting agencies over-interpret or underperform. Kennedy does not speak for the entire body, but he signals openness to any path that puts the right tool in the right hand with the right limits. The chair looks around the curve. No one signals for more time. The counsel caps a pen and straightens the stack of statutes. The witness exhales the kind of breath you exhale after landing a plane in clear weather. Kennedy draws a line across his pad from A to R, a habit as old as his first hearing. Authority to remedies walked without hurry, without detour, with room for others to speak. He stands the pencil on its eraser for a second and smiles to himself. The method did not just survive the day, it shaped it. In the corridor later, staff from both offices trade polite notes about definitions they want to refine and examples they plan to add to future statements. That is how institutions change in real time, not by fireworks, but by edits. Kennedy thanks the committee aides by name as they hand back marked copies of exhibits. Warren thanks the counsel for reading a thorny definition with care. The public rarely sees these short exchanges. They are the quiet signatures on the day's work. Back inside the near-empty room, the last camera light dims. The horseshoe looks like a drawing in a civics book. Papers are squared. Chairs are pushed in. On the table where Kennedy sat lies a single index card left by design. Ask, source, standard, burden, remedy, record. The card is not a trophy. It is a reminder for the next hearing, the next debate, the next time a claim sounds certain, but arrives without a home. The institution is better when those 6 words are present. The country is better when those 6 words leave the room with everyone who heard them. The day moves on without fanfare. That is the point. A clean method should feel ordinary. When it does, hearings turn from stage to workshop, and institutions gain back a little of the trust they have been spending for too long. Kennedy walks down the hall with the same ordinary stride he used coming in, binder under arm, mind already turning to the drafting work that honest hearings invite. Across the building, Warren's team folds their charts and starts a memo titled Lessons for Next Time. 2 lanes again, 2 traditions, 1 table. The gavel's echo fades, but the record remains firm as a plumb line ready to support everything that needs to be built next. A bar association in a mid-sized city hosts a lunchtime forum and streams it on a plain web page with no music and no spin. The moderator puts a single slide on the screen that reads, Show the words and let them work. Panelists walk through how to separate policy preferences from legal grants, how to read a definition section without getting lost, how to spot the difference between guidance and a binding rule. Viewers leave comments that sound like relief. They say the fog is thinner. A producer at a regional station builds a small toolkit for on-air guests. It is not a trap. It is a set of simple prompts. Point to the statute. Name the standard. Say who bears the burden. Describe the remedy. The first week, some guests stumble. By the second week, most arrive with printouts. The conversation gains friction in the best way. Claims have to grip something real. Advocacy groups update their playbooks. When they push for a change, they pair the moral case with a legal case. They draft model text, then invite skeptics to mark it up. The meetings are not smooth, but they are honest. People leave with edits rather than slogans. That feels like progress, and it is. Kennedy keeps the spotlight small and the task list long. He sends notes to committee chairs encouraging a shared glossary for recurring terms that cause confusion. He asks councils to pool best practices for entering exhibits cleanly so future readers will not have to guess what the record means. He supports a staff exchange so that offices can borrow each other's checklists. None of this will trend. All of it will matter. Elizabeth Warren carries her lane forward with equal steadiness. She folds method into advocacy, insisting that ambitious policy should arrive wearing a well-tailored legal jacket. Her team drafts authority where gaps appeared and works with committee staff to test it against the standards that govern. 2 lanes, 1 map. The audience at home begins to recognize this as normal rather than rare. On campuses, student groups host after-hours workshops called Read the Rule Nights. Pizza boxes and photocopies share tables. Volunteers help classmates trace a claim back to a section number. The room laughs when someone tries to skip a definition and gets burned by a term of art. The learning sticks because the lesson is both humble and useful. Newsrooms adopt a small rule that changes tone more than any new graphic package ever could. If a guest makes a legal claim, the control room throws the primary text on screen before the segment ends. The pause that follows is the quiet sound of civic muscles getting stronger. Ratings hold. Trust inches upward. In state houses, a handful of committees begin each hearing with a 1-minute reminder about the record. The chair explains that exhibits are not theater props, that citations must be complete, that definitions will be read aloud when terms wobble. No one applauds. People simply do the work. The floor feels level. Kennedy ends the chapter with a walk down a hallway lined with portraits of legislators who understood that craft is a public service. He thinks about the next setting, the one with folding chairs, and a whiteboard, the one where citizens will kick the tires on the method and decide if it belongs to them. He believes it does. He believes that a rule explained plainly is a neighborly act. He believes that a country can be both kind and careful. He turns into the prep room and finds the team already gathering materials for the community forum. A staffer holds up a draft handout titled How to Test a Public Claim in 5 Steps. Another stacks copies of a short glossary. A third checks a slide that says, "Where does the authority live?" in large letters that can be read from the back row. The room feels like the start of a service project, not the end of a show. Outside, the building returns to its ordinary rhythm. Elevators ding, phones ring. The Capitol hums along without dramatic music. Yet something subtle has shifted. People expect better footing under big words. They ask for the page. They wait to see it. They are learning to hold power by the handle the law provides. The last line in the day's notebook is plain. Take the method to the people and let them own it. That line points past the hearing room and into the next chapter, where the craft of law will meet the daily craft of life. The map is ready. The doors are open. The work will continue where trust is earned most in rooms without marble and with plenty of light. The questions turn from, "What do I do?" into "How do we keep this going?" A teenager in a hoodie raises a hand and says he runs the social feed for his debate club. Can we post primary text with every claim we share? Kennedy grins and shrugs in that quiet way that means of course. He asks the room to imagine a feed where captions are short and sources are longer. Not flashy, just faithful. A few heads nod. The teen takes a handout and promises to try it this week. A pastor describes a neighborhood dispute about parking rules and asks whether the toolkit can lower the temperature. Kennedy walks the steps on the whiteboard as if he were teaching two neighbors to pass a ball without dropping it. Start with the page where the authority lives. Read the definitions out loud so both sides hear the same words. Note who has the burden. Decide whether the remedy is a waiver, an appeal, or a revision to the rule itself. Write down what you agree on before anyone leaves the room. The pastor smiles. A process that dignifies both sides often dignifies the outcome. A city employee in the back mentions that her office fields angry calls and wonders how to invite callers into the method without sounding evasive. Kennedy suggests a simple script that begins with the phrase, "Let us find the words together," then a promise to send the exact citation before end of day. Then the invitation to call back after reading so questions can be sharper and answers can be better. Transparency is not a stunt. It is hospitality. The session edges toward closing. Kennedy draws a small triangle on the board and labels the corners text, process, and people. He explains that good government lives in the middle of that shape. Text without people ignores real life. People without process drift toward favoritism. Process without text becomes theater. The five-step toolkit keeps all three corners in view. That balance is not glamorous. It is durable. He hands the marker to a librarian, steps aside, and asks the room to teach back what they learned. The librarian leads a quick lightning round. A parent summarizes ask for the source in one line. A nurse nails name the standard with a crisp definition. A contractor explains assign the burden by describing who brings the plans and who approves them. A student defines describe the remedy as the path out of a maze you did not build. A retiree says build the record is how you remember what happened when memory gets political. The room laughs softly at that, and the lesson sticks a little deeper. Before anyone leaves, volunteers set up a table for sign-ups. One sheet for a neighborhood reading group that will meet monthly. One sheet for small businesses that want a lunchtime clinic on licensing rules. One sheet for students who want to help seniors draft simple letters that ask for citations. The lists fill faster than anyone expects. That is what happens when a method feels owned rather than rented. Kennedy thanks the staff by name, then thanks the room for the patience it takes to trade heat for light. He leaves them with one last thought that sounds like a benediction and a dare. Keep the 5 lines close enough to touch. Use them when you agree and when you do not. Correct yourself when the record requires it. Apologize quickly when you aimed too far. Invite opponents to walk the page with you. If enough of us do that, hearings will feel less like storms and more like workshops, and workshops build. Chairs scrape. The whiteboard wears faint ghosts of block letters. People cluster in small circles comparing notes and swapping examples from their lives. Outside the street is ordinary, which is exactly right. A healthy republic is mostly ordinary work done in ordinary rooms by ordinary people using tools that any neighbor can learn. The toolkit fits in a pocket. The habit fits in a day. The lesson fits in a sentence you can teach to a child. Ask for the source. Name the standard. Assign the burden. Describe the remedy. Build the record. Then do it again tomorrow.